I clean air bimps for a living, so I'm used to walking into rooms that have already decided what kind of night someone just had without saying a single word. Most of the time, I arrive after the story is over. The guests have gone home, the smiles are posted, the reviews are typed, and I'm left with the hangover of the weekend. My job is to erase the evidence that real people were ever there at all, so the next strangers can pretend the place was waiting just for them and nobody else. I've cleaned up after anniversaries, affairs, business trips, breakups, bachelorette weekends, and one very polite crime I still pretend I didn't fully understand. People ask if anything truly scary ever happens. They picture blood on carpets and strangers in closets, but they never guess the quiet parts that actually stay with me. This story begins with a host named Maya, one of those efficient, brisk people who treat running air bimps like commanding a very small, very anxious army. She usually messages with short checklists and too many emojis, like she's trying to soften the edges of how stressed she is about strangers touching her stuff. That evening, though, there were no emojis, just a message that looked like it had been typed with her teeth clenched and her eyes glued to the screen in worry. "Hey, need you urgently at my city center unit," she wrote. "Guest's checkout was at 11, but the system still shows him inside. I can't reach him." I stared at the message a second longer than necessary, because "still inside" is not a phrase you want to hear when your job involves entering locked rooms alone. She followed up almost instantly, as if afraid I would decide my answer during the time it took her to breathe between sentences. "Door sensor says it never opened since last night. Cleaner I booked ghosted me. I trust you more. Please go check. Just tell me if everything's okay." Hosts love that word, okay, like it's a switch you can flip if you scrub hard enough and ignore the things you shouldn't think about too long. I checked my schedule, saw an empty space I had been hoping to fill with sleep and silence, and watched it transform into something else entirely. "Send me the address and the code," I replied. "If he's still in there, I'm not walking in alone. I'll call from the hall first." "Of course," she wrote. "If he answers, just say you're there to clean. If he doesn't answer, please see what's going on. I'm really worried about this one." Worried hosts are not unusual. Worried hosts who stop using smiley faces and write full sentences with proper punctuation are a different level of concern. The unit was in a renovated old building over a pharmacy, the kind of place that looks charming from the outside and tired when you're standing inside the stairwell. The entry code opened a heavy door that had seen better decades, the hinges complaining softly like an old man getting up from a low couch in the dark. The stairwell smelled of dust, medicine, and someone's dinner from hours ago, the scents layering into something that felt more like history than comfort. Maya's apartment was on the third floor, door 3C, a plain white door with a modern smart lock grafted on top like a piece of plastic future stuck to tired wood. The hallway was quiet, too quiet for a building that cheap. No televisions, no arguments, no broken laughter leaking under doors, just a long carpet and faint buzzing lights. I stopped in front of 3C and pulled out my phone, the cold glow lighting my fingers as I brought up Maya's chat at the top of my screen. "I'm outside the unit," I typed. "I'll try calling him now. If he doesn't answer, I'm using the code, but I'm not responsible if he screams." She replied with a single message that felt heavier than the words themselves. "Thank you. His name is Lucas. He checked in alone. He's odd in messages." I dialed the number she sent, pressed the phone to my ear, and listened to it ring on the other side of the door like a small mechanical animal pacing. The call went through to voicemail on the third ring, a robotic, empty voice informing me that Lucas could not answer and might never listen to this message anyway. I hung up, waited, then knocked, knuckles rapping lightly against the wood, the sound swallowed by the thick silence of the hallway around me. "Lucas," I called, louder than I wanted to. "This is cleaning. Checkout was earlier. If you're still inside, please say something before I open the door." Nothing answered, not even the polite noises of someone pretending to be in the shower or deeply asleep or anywhere else, but right behind that door. I knocked again, harder this time, letting the impatience in my hand speak for me since my voice had decided it would rather stay low and cautious. Still nothing, just the faint hum of the smart lock waiting patiently to decide whose side it was on in this small, awkward confrontation in the hallway. I typed in the code Maya had given me, feeling my pulse tick with every button press, waiting for the little mechanical click that means obligation has defeated hesitation. The lock turned green and the bolt slid back like a quiet sigh. The door moved under my hand, heavy but not resisting, as if it had already decided to let me in. The first thing I did was lean in just enough to smell the inside, because my nose has saved me from bad situations more often than my sense of bravery ever has. It smelled like stale air, reheated food, and something else faint underneath, metallic and thin, hiding behind the wallpaper of more familiar apartment scents. "Lucas," I called again, voice softer now that the threshold was open. "It's cleaning, I'm coming in, please don't be naked or dead. Those are my only 2 requests." No reply. No shuffle, no mutter, no sudden movement, just the same thick, steady silence sitting in the middle of the room like an invisible piece of furniture. I stepped inside and pushed the door closed behind me, not all the way, leaving a sliver of light from the hallway like a tiny, reluctant lifeline. The blinds were halfway down, filtering the city into horizontal stripes of gray and softer gray, the room lit with the dull reluctance of a cloudy afternoon. The living space was small: a couch, a low table, a little dining corner, and a kitchenette that looked more decorative than truly useful for actual cooking. The couch cushions were slightly slumped but not destroyed, a blanket folded on one armrest with too much precision for someone truly chaotic or drunk. On the table, there was an empty bowl with the dried outline of soup, a spoon resting inside it like someone had planned to come back and never did. A glass of water sat beside the bowl, half full and ringed with a clear lip mark, the liquid surface perfectly still, as if no one had breathed on it for hours. I scanned for the usual red flags: broken glass, scattered pills, overturned chairs, but the room looked more paused than wrecked, like a show cut to commercial. The bedroom door was slightly open, just enough for me to see that the bed was unmade. Sheets thrown back, pillow dented, no obvious body visible from here. I left my bag by the entrance, keeping my phone in my hand, thumb ready over the emergency call button, even though I still told myself I was overreacting. "Luca's last call," I said. "If you're here and alive, say something now. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you checked out with the rest of your soul." The bedroom answered with nothing, but the soft creak of its own door as I pushed it further with the back of my wrist, the hinges complaining in a long, tired breath. The bed looked like someone had gotten out of it too quickly. Covers pushed back, one corner hanging off the side, a book face down on the rumpled sheet. The closet door stood open, showing nothing but a couple of empty hangers and a shelf that looked like it had never believed in personal belongings at all. There was no one in the bed, no one in the closet, no one behind the bedroom door, no one sitting in the corner waiting to jump up and explain this weird misunderstanding. For a moment I felt relieved, then confused. If he had left, why hadn't the door sensor logged anything? And where was his luggage, his clothes, his life? The only bags in the room were the garbage bags in the kitchen, still neatly folded under the sink, quietly waiting for a job they had not yet been asked to perform. I moved through the apartment one slow step at a time, eyes scanning for anything that could explain why Maya's system still insisted someone was inside this little world. The bathroom light was off, the door slightly ajar, a thin line of darker darkness marking its frame against the gray of the wall. I have learned that the real stories hide in bathrooms more than anywhere else, so I approached that door like it had a secret it did not want me to share. "Lucas," I said one last time, voice low and steady. "If you're in the bathroom, I'm going to open the door now. If you don't want that, say something." Silence answered again, and I realized I was no longer trying to get him to respond for his sake. I was trying to give my fear one last chance to be reasonable. I pushed the door open with the side of my foot and flicked the light switch with my elbow, stepping back half a pace as the bright artificial light snapped on. The bathroom was clean in the way that says, "I shower here, but I don't live here." No makeup, no razor, no clutter, just basic shampoo and a single sad bar of soap. The shower curtain was half drawn, not wide open, not fully closed, a position that always feels like a question mark slouching lazily against the bathtub edge. I pulled it back with 2 fingers and found nothing but a damp tub, a few stray hairs near the drain, and the shiny curve of the faucet catching the hard white light. He was not in the shower, not crumpled on the tiles, not slumped on the toilet, not sprawled behind the door. There was no body here to match the invisible presence in the app. But something still felt wrong, and that's the problem with instincts. Once they start talking, they don't care if the physical evidence is keeping up with them. I checked the medicine cabinet. Inside, there were painkillers, a half-used pack of bandages, and a tiny bottle of melatonin gummies with 4 pieces missing. The sink was dry, the mirror only held my own tired reflection, and yet I could not shake the feeling that the apartment was still occupied by something more than stale air. I went back to the living room and noticed the only truly personal object in the entire place, a notebook lying underneath the coffee table like it had tried to hide. It was small, black, and held together with a rubber band, edges bent. Cover smudged with fingerprints that said someone touched it constantly and maybe nervously. I hesitated, then pulled off the band and opened it, telling myself that if Maya wanted me to tell her what was going on, I had to look where people leave their secrets. The first pages were full of dates, little notes about places, times, amounts, the kind of obsessive tracking you usually see in people counting calories, steps, or enemies. Then the entries shifted, a single line repeated across several days, always written at the bottom like a conclusion he kept reaching and never resolved. "There in the walls," he had written, "not the neighbors, the others." The word "others" was underlined once, then twice, then so many times the paper looked bruised. One page was different. The handwriting was shaky, slanted, the letters bigger and more chaotic, ink darker, where the pen had lingered too long over each slow, careful stroke. "If I disappear," that page began, "it means they finally found a way to keep the door from opening. Tell whoever comes after me to check the vents at 02:17. That time again? 02:17. The same numbers I had seen in another apartment, on another note, written by another stranger whose fear I had walked through like invisible smoke. It could have been a coincidence, except coincidences don't usually live in notebooks written by people who vanish without taking their own shoes. I swallowed, put the notebook down, and realized I hadn't checked under the bed yet, a rookie mistake my nerves had conveniently postponed until now. I crouched beside the bed and lifted the sheet, half expecting to see a face staring back at me, half praying for nothing but dust and forgotten socks. Instead, I found a row of plastic containers lined up neatly along the wall, each labeled with masking tape and the same careful handwriting from the notebook. Mike on one, Cam on another, Lock on the third, and the last one, the smallest, simply read log 02:17 in letters that looked like they had been written without blinking. I pulled that one out with 2 fingers, my gloves squeaking softly against the sides, and popped the lid, revealing a pile of folded printouts and a small USB drive. On top of the stack was a printed screenshot of Maya's hosting dashboard from the platform, date and time stamps, circled in red ink like targets. Next to several nights, the same pattern appeared. A small door icon, the words "door opened," and the time 02, 17 a.m., even on days where no one was supposed to be staying. According to the log, the door of 3C had been opening at 02:17 exactly for weeks. Even on nights, the apartment was officially empty and unbooked. My mouth went dry in that unpleasant way that has nothing to do with thirst and everything to do with the way your body prepares for a truth it doesn't want. I glanced at the apartment door. It remained closed, the smart lock's tiny light off, innocent, pretending it had never done anything unusual in its short plastic life. If the logs were right, someone or something had been triggering that lock at the same eerie minute every night, including nights nobody had codes or keys. I texted Maya before my brain could talk me out of it. No sign of Lucas or his stuff, but I found something you need to see. Your logs show door openings at 02:17. Seconds later, my phone buzzed with her reply. "That's impossible," she wrote. "The system shows no one registered in those nights. I thought it was a glitch. You saw it too." "I'm holding his printed screenshots," I typed. He labeled them log 02:17 like it was a thing he was tracking. "Your door is opening when no one is supposed to be here." Another pause, and then, "I'm calling the platform," she wrote. "And maybe the building manager. Please don't leave yet, I feel sick. Is everything else normal inside?" Normal is a flexible word. There were no bodies, no blood, no obvious shattered crime scene. Just an empty apartment, fearful notes, and a door with bad timing. I walked over to the entry and looked at the lock up close, half expecting to find a camera, a microphone, or some kind of extra hidden piece that would explain everything. It was just plastic and metal, like all the others, the only difference being the tension wound invisibly around it by the knowledge of what it had been doing at night. My eyes drifted to the vent above the door, a small metal grid where the air should move but rarely does in older buildings that pretend to be modern. "Tell whoever comes after me to check the vents at 02:17, the note had said, and whoever came after him was standing here now, watching dust gather in the metal grooves. I dragged a chair under the vent, climbed up carefully, and held my phone's light against the slats, peering inside like someone checking between the teeth of a giant metal mouth. At first I saw nothing but dust, old spider webs, and the kind of gray fuzz that builds wherever air moves just enough to collect, but not enough to clean itself. Then, further back, I saw something that didn't belong, straight edges, a tiny dark shape, a small square that caught just enough light to prove it was not part of the duct. I reached in with 2 fingers, cursing softly as rusty metal scratched my glove, and felt hard plastic, the unmistakable body of a small motion sensor or camera left to watch. It was taped inside, pointed toward the door, wired crudely into a cable that slipped deeper into the building's skeleton, disappearing into spaces I would never see. I pulled until the tape gave way with a harsh ripping sound, and the device came loose, dangling from a short wire that tugged like a stubborn umbilical cord. Something clicked softly inside it, like a tiny switch resentful of being yanked out of its comfortable, hidden post above decades of collected building secrets. I held it in my hand, light reflecting off a tiny lens and a faint red LED that pulsed once, then went dark, either dead or just pretending to be. I took a photo, then another, one with my glove beside it for scale, so Maya and anyone else would see exactly how small and deliberate this thing really was. When I climbed down, my phone buzzed again. Maya had sent a screenshot of her own logs, highlighting the same 02:17 entries with shaking digital yellow highlighter. "I thought it was a bug," she wrote. "The platform support blamed my Wi-Fi. They said door sensors can sometimes drift. They never said anything about cameras in vents." I sent her the photos of the device and the box of printouts, the notebook pages, the simple line. "If I disappear, it means they finally found a way to keep the door from opening." For a long time, she didn't reply, and I sat there on the borrowed chair under the vent, listening to the building hum the pipes creak, and my heart argue with my brain. Eventually, another message came through. "Police are on their way," she wrote, and I called building security. "Please don't touch anything else, I'm shaking." I wanted to say that I was shaking too, just inwardly, where no one could see it, the tremor moving through my thoughts instead of my hands. While I waited, I put the device carefully on the table and looked around, trying to imagine Lucas's last hours in this apartment before he either left or vanished between its walls. I saw him replaying the footage, counting the door openings at 02, 17, listening for steps in the hallway, wondering if the building was letting someone in without a code. I wondered how many times he had sat where I was sitting, watching the door, waiting for it to move, trying to decide if he was paranoid or paying attention. When the police finally arrived, they looked at the vent, the device, the logs, the notebook, and each other, the way people do when the story is stranger than the paperwork can handle. They took statements, collected the sensor, bagged the USB drive, asked polite questions about my role, making sure they understood I was just the one who came after checkout. They promised to contact Lucas if they could find him, to review the lock logs from the platform, to check building security cameras for late-night visitors at that cursed time. I left the building after they were done with me, stepping back out into the evening air that felt too bright and too normal after the dim tension inside 3C. On the bus home, I watched the city lights smear across the window, every green and red blur starting to look like a small, grainy lead telling me something I couldn't decode. When I finally got back to my own apartment, I went straight to my notebook and wrote down everything while it was still sharp and ugly in my head. Maya, 3C Lucas missing, door sensor logs, 0217 openings, vent device, hidden watcher above the door, note about disappearing, others in the walls. I underlined check the vents twice, then underlined 02, 17 three times, the ink pressing so hard the pages beneath got faint scars of the same numbers. That night, I lay in bed listening for my own door, my own vents, any sound that would mean the boundaries of my life had become porous in ways I didn't consent to. My cheap analog clock on the wall ticked loudly enough to sound like a bad joke, dragging itself toward 2 like it wanted me to stare it down. At 02:16, I was already awake, eyes open, watching the ceiling and the seam where the wall meets the doorframe like something might start breathing through it. At 02:17, nothing moved, nothing beeped, nothing clicked. The only thing that changed was the shape of the numbers on the clock and the tightness of my chest. But once you have cleaned an apartment that refuses to accept its own emptiness, you stop believing that a quiet night means nothing is happening behind the walls. So when people ask me now if I've ever been truly scared at work, I don't tell them about blood or fights or the time I found an entire door ripped from its hinges. I tell them about an empty room that insisted it wasn't empty, a door that opened when no one was supposed to be there, an event that watched every single movement in silence. I tell them about the man who wrote, "If I disappear," and how nobody knew whether he left through the front door or slipped through a crack only the building could see. And then I remind them, gently, that when they check out and drop the keys, someone always goes in after them, walks through their air, and notices the things they didn't. Because I'm an air blimp cleaner, and while everyone else worries about the strangers they might meet while checking in, I've started worrying more about who never really checks out. The morning after 3C, Maya sent me a string of messages that looked like they'd been written between waves of nausea and angry phone calls. "Security checked the hallway cams," she wrote. "Nothing at 02:17, no one at the door, but the lock log still says it opened. How does a door open with no one there?" She followed it with a screenshot. Grainy footage of an empty, badly lit hallway, timestamp frozen at 02:17, the door icon on her app reporting a quiet little lie. The video showed stillness. The data said the lock had cycled. Somewhere between those two things, someone had moved or something had lied convincingly. Platform says it's a known issue with some models, she added. They told me to reboot the lock, like that would reboot whatever Lucas thought he saw. I stared at that phrase, known issue, and wondered whether they kept a special list for glitches that moved doors at night and drove guests into notebook confessionals. I asked her if they'd found Lucas yet, but that answer took longer, and each minute of blinking typing dots felt like watching someone pace a tiny digital room. Phone off, card not used, she finally wrote. No trace since checkout morning. His emergency contact said he travels a lot and disappears sometimes. They didn't sound shocked. Maybe he just walked away and decided not to look back, I told myself. People leave lives, jobs, cities, lovers. Leaving behind one haunted apartment is nothing by comparison. But the part of me that keeps a notebook refused to file him under wandered off. At least not when his last written sentence began with, "If I disappear, it means." That week I cleaned 4 more places, none of them in that building, but every smart lock I touched felt different, like I was shaking hands with something that remembered me. Every hallway camera looked a little too aware, every vent a little too deep, every digital clock a little too eager to show me 02, 17 if I glanced at it the wrong moment. One evening, Maya booked me again, this time for another unit she owned across town, a clean, bright studio that hadn't yet learned how to keep secrets. Different building, she wrote. Old client canceled, need a reset between stays. Don't worry, no missing guests, just normal mess this time, I promise. The place really was normal, towels on the floor, sand in the sheets, cheap sunscreen on the sink, a fridge full of half-finished vacation plans in plastic containers. But when I opened the cleaning checklist she'd attached, I noticed a new line at the bottom, squeezed in between check under bed and wipe top of fridge. Vents, it said, with a little question mark typed hard enough to feel like a nail. Could you just make sure nothing is taped inside them? Humor me. So I dragged chairs, climbed up, and shone my flashlight into every vent, feeling half foolish, half like a priest checking behind icons for hidden microphones in an old movie. I found nothing but dust and spiderwebs, but I took photos anyway and sent them to her. Each grainy interior shot a small, weird reassurance against the unknown. Thank you, she replied. I know it's not technically your job. I can pay extra for the vent checks. I just sleep better knowing someone is willing to actually look. I typed back, looking is free. Pretending I didn't see something is what costs me later, then deleted it and replaced it with a neutral thumbs up emoji instead. That night, when I got home, I opened my notebook not just to record the day, but to make a new column beside my list of addresses and oddities. On the left, I wrote cameras, hidden sensors, tiles, vents, door logs. On the right, I wrote a single anchoring word that held all of them together, 0217. It was ridiculous, maybe. 3 digits and a colon, a time most people only see when they wake up thirsty, roll over, and forget it in the morning. But for me, it had started to feel like the hour when the buildings took a breath for themselves, when the devices answered to someone else for a while. I started checking every clock that appeared in the background of my jobs, microwave displays, oven timers, digital thermostats, blinking router lights. Most of them showed nonsense, 12. 00 flashing forever or random numbers with no relation to reality. But once in a while, I'd catch one frozen at that cursed minute. One listing had promotional photos with a digital clock visible in the corner of the bedroom, marketing material proudly stamped with 02, 17 over a smiling, staged bed. In that one, I turned off all the lights, sat on the edge of the mattress when I should have been stripping it, and listened to the room hum in the dark for a full 5 minutes. Nothing happened. No doors opened themselves, no TVs flicked on, no vents whispered. Still, the feeling stayed, like someone had leaned in close and then decided to wait. After a while, I realized something else had changed that I hadn't noticed at first. Hosts were starting to treat me like more than just a pair of rubber gloves. Maya wasn't the only one asking me to take a quick look at the vents if you have time, or tell me if anything feels off about the devices in the bedroom. They started forwarding me weird screenshots from their dashboards, lights toggling at odd hours, thermostats adjusting by themselves, locks reporting opens that cameras never confirmed. "Is this normal?" they would ask. "Does this happen in other places?" As if I were the person who designed the buildings instead of the one who mopped their floors. I didn't have real answers, just stories. But sometimes stories are the only way to make sense of patterns when data feels like it's lying or refusing to explain itself. So I kept cleaning, kept checking, kept writing, the notebook growing heavier in my bag as if ink had actual weight and memory pressed down on the pages from above. One night, exhausted, I fell asleep on my couch with the TV on low and my phone on my chest, notebook open beside me like an extra, silent person in the room. I woke up gasping from a dream where every door in a long hallway opened at once at 02, 17, and every room behind them was just another copy of 3C with different furniture. The TV still played, the clock still ticked, my phone still rested where I'd left it, but my notebook had slid open to the latest page, the corner bent as if someone had flipped it. In the margin, where I could have sworn I'd left empty paper, there was a single new line scrawled in my own pen, in my own handwriting, in a style I did not remember using. "You are always the one who comes after," it read, "but you never ask who arrives before or who stays when everyone else leaves at last." Maybe I wrote it half asleep. Maybe I had meant to and forgot. Maybe my hand was catching up to thoughts my conscious mind refused to let all the way in. I stared at the sentence for a long time, then added a small note beneath it, just 2 words to keep myself honest. Noted, watching. And then I did the only thing I am actually qualified to do in this strange little horror anthology nobody knows they're living in. I went back to work. Because as long as strangers keep checking in and out, as long as hosts keep chasing perfect reviews, as long as platforms keep treating glitches like acceptable hauntings, I have a role. I'm the one who comes in afterward, who sees the leftovers of fear on the floor, who notices when the wrong numbers repeat themselves in too many rooms to ignore. I'm an airbnb cleaner, and I used to think my job was just to make places look like nothing ever happened the night before. Now I'm starting to suspect my real job is to notice when the buildings themselves stop believing that's true, and write it down before I'm the one who never checks out. I never saw Lucas, not once. I only walked through the outline he left behind, like a chalk body drawn with soup bowls, crumpled sheets, and printed logs. The platform closed his case as guest unreachable, and the building moved on, but 3C still lives in my notebook under one simple label: the guest who never checked out. Sometimes, when I unlock a new door and smell that same half-finished air, I wonder if I'm walking into someone else's last known address again without knowing it yet. And when the lock chirps politely to let me in, I can't help glancing at the time, just to make sure it doesn't say 02, 17 before I cross the threshold.